Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the smoke-choked streets of Madrid, the year 1808. You can almost hear the bells clanging in panic and smell the gunpowder drifting through narrow alleys as Spanish civilians, shoemakers, nuns, beggars, anyone with two hands, snatch kitchen knives and hunting muskets to face the finest army in Europe. On that second day of May, the 2 de Mayo, the French occupation meets its first real taste of chaos. It starts with a rumor. Napoleon's troops are preparing to take the last members of Spain's royal family out of the capital. In a heartbeat, rumor turns to riot. Mothers scream from balconies, soldiers fire into crowds, and the cobblestones run slick. You probably won't survive this if you're foolish enough to stand in the plaza tonight. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing this little global campfire grow. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The story of the Peninsular War doesn't open with generals poring over maps. It begins with civilians who decide they've had enough. Napoleon's grand plan had been so clinical on paper. Remove Spain's tottering Bourbon king, replace him with his loyal brother Joseph, and guide a backward, priest-ridden land into the modern age. He imagined gratitude. Instead, he got fury. Historians still argue whether Napoleon truly understood the depth of Spanish faith, or simply dismissed it as superstition. Whatever the reason, when French bayonets gleamed outside Madrid's royal palace, something ancient snapped. You trudge through the city's twisting lanes as church bells hammer the air. A group of knife-wielding artisans surges past, shouting, "Mueran los franceses!" Death to the French. A cannon from the Monteleone barracks thunders, and French dragoons wheel into view, sabers drawn, their horses' hooves clattering like thunder on stone. Somewhere, painter Francisco Goya hides behind a shutter, sketching frantic impressions that he'll later turn into the 3rd of May, 1808, a tableau of execution and despair that still makes viewers shiver 2 centuries later. In the midst of the smoke stands a barefoot teenage boy clutching a length of iron pipe, trembling but unmoving as a cavalryman bears down on him. That image, half courage, half madness, captures the mood of the day. By nightfall, the uprising is crushed. Hundreds of civilians lie in heaps, and French troops, exasperated by resistance, begin executing prisoners by torchlight. Yet in killing the rebellion, they ignite something larger. Across Spain, word spreads like wildfire that Madrid has bled for honor. The next morning, you walk past a wall pocked with musket holes, black with soot. A friar whispers over a line of corpses. French soldiers glance around uneasily, aware that eyes watch them from every window. The occupation that was meant to bring order now feels like a curse. A fringe tidbit: Napoleon's staff reportedly nicknamed Spain the ulcer, a wound that would not heal. Some even joked darkly that the emperor had conquered a graveyard. Still, the French cling to their illusions. In dispatches, generals write of pacification, as though calm could be restored by decree. They impose curfews, seize churches, requisition food, each act pushing more civilians into rebellion. You notice how silence follows French patrols, a silence thick with hate. It's a curious thing. The same streets where crowds once cheered Napoleon's victories now hum with whispered prayers for vengeance. Night after night, the capital's lamps burn low. The sound of boots echoes through arcades. Somewhere near the Puerta del Sol, a woman hides a wounded soldier beneath her floorboards. She's risking her life, yet her expression is calm, almost serene. She tells you, softly, Spain belongs to God, not to an emperor. Whether that's patriotism or pure faith, even scholars can't quite agree. Meanwhile, French officers lodge in confiscated homes, trying to impose Enlightenment ideals on people who no longer care. They draft proclamations about progress and prosperity, but no one reads them. What the citizens see instead are executions in the Retiro Park and the constant funerals. You drift past one of those processions, candles guttering in the wind, a priest chanting, soldiers watching nervously. There's something haunting in how grief becomes a form of resistance. Every tear shed is another quiet oath against the occupier. A mainstream historical fact anchors this scene. By the end of 1808, nearly every province in Spain was in open revolt. Napoleon had expected gratitude. Instead, he had to send an army of 250,000 men just to keep the peninsula under control. That's not modernization, that's quicksand, and the French know it. Step into the plaza again. The blood is dried, but the smell lingers. Children trace the outline of bullet holes with curious fingers, as if memorizing them. A baker mutters that for every man the French shoot, 10 more will rise. Maybe he's exaggerating, but you can feel truth in it. Resistance has become contagious. Historians still debate whether this spontaneous uprising qualifies as the first People's War of modern Europe. Some argue earlier revolts earned that title. Others insist that Spain's defiance was unique, a fusion of religion, nationalism, and fury. You just know it feels alive. In taverns, ballads about the martyrs of Madrid begin circulating, sung in hushed tones over cups of bitter wine. The French can suppress bodies, but not songs. Even among the French ranks, morale wavers. Letters home speak of phantom knives in the dark, of women who spit on soldiers, and priests who bless assassins. An officer records almost wistfully that he once believed he was bringing civilization, but now he dreams only of going home. Another quirk: a few enterprising French soldiers start buying local amulets, hoping for protection against what they call the curse of Spain. Enlightened men reduced to superstition. It's both tragic and a little poetic. As the summer sun bakes the city, famine creeps in. Prices soar, tempers snap. A rumor spreads that Joseph Bonaparte, mockingly nicknamed Pepe Botella, Joe the Bottle, for his supposed fondness for drink, is planning to flee Madrid. Whether true or not, it deepens contempt. You can almost hear the ghostly laughter of those who died in May whispering, "We told you so." And so the uprising of Dos de Mayo becomes more than an event. It becomes a legend, etched into every Spanish soul. Each village now looks to Madrid's sacrifice as proof that resistance is possible. What began as panic has hardened into purpose. The French, for all their discipline and cannon, have awakened something they can't shoot down: belief. By dusk, church bells toll again, not for fear this time, but for remembrance. The sky glows red above the city roofs, and you wonder if Goya might be sketching that very color onto one of his nightmares. The quiet that follows isn't peace. It's the pause before a nation decides to fight forever if it must. You feel the air grow still, thick with promise and smoke. Somewhere far off, hooves drum against the road. French reinforcements heading south, unaware they're marching into a country that has learned how to hate in unison. The streets of Madrid may seem subdued tonight, but they are the cradle of a storm that will swallow empires. And as the last light fades, you realize the irony. Napoleon wanted to enlighten Spain, and instead, he lit a fire that will burn his empire hollow. You wake to the clang of distant bells and the smell of burning olive oil, the scent of war spreading beyond Madrid. By now, news of the uprising has leapt from province to province like sparks carried on the wind. Town criers shout of French atrocities, priests thunder from pulpits that defending Spain is defending the Virgin herself. You find yourself riding dusty roads beside mule caravans and peasants armed with farm tools. It isn't an army, it's a nation boiling over. In Zaragoza, the revolution takes a new shape. Picture it, a city ringed by walls, its churches gleaming in the summer heat. its people vowing to fight until every stone drips with blood. The French commander, Lefebvre, expects a swift siege. After all, Zaragoza has no great fortresses. But the citizens, led by the indomitable José de Palafox, transform homes into barricades and convents into bastions. The women, famously, fight too. One name whispers through history: Agustina de Aragon, a young woman who supposedly rushes to a deserted cannon during battle, lights its fuse, and fires point blank into an oncoming column. Whether she truly did or not, historians still argue, but in the Spanish imagination, she becomes immortal, the Maid of Zaragoza. You stand with her on that rampart. The air trembles from musket volleys, and the screams of the wounded mingle with church choirs singing to drown the fear. The cannon leaps, smoke erupts, and the French line buckles. For a moment, it seems as if courage itself could hold back an empire. Yet the siege grinds on. Disease spreads, food runs out. Still, the defenders refuse to yield. When the French finally storm the ruins months later, they find a city that smells of death and incense, where half the population lies buried under rubble. A mainstream fact: of Zaragoza's 55,000 inhabitants, fewer than 15,000 survive the first siege. The city becomes a symbol, the Spanish Thermopylae. Even Napoleon's marshals, hardened men like Lannes, write home in awe. These people fight like devils. It's not meant as flattery, it's disbelief. Elsewhere, Valencia rises, Seville forms juntas, and the countryside bristles with militias who swear loyalty not to a general but to the idea of España Libre. And as you travel through these uprisings, you sense a pattern forming. Every act of resistance feeds the next. Every French reprisal, another execution, another burned village, turns into a rallying cry. A quirky tidbit: some villages begin crafting homemade flags from women's skirts dyed red and yellow, long before Spain has an official national standard. The colors symbolize blood and sunlight, an oddly fitting palette for a rebellion that's equal parts tragedy and miracle. Still, rebellion is chaos. You march through Extremadura and see men arguing over who commands whom, priests clutching muskets, and local leaders calling themselves generals of liberty after winning a single skirmish. One of them, a former innkeeper, insists you address him as Your Excellency. You try not to laugh. War makes strange nobles. Meanwhile, the French high command watches the peninsula descend into madness. Napoleon, ever the strategist, believes the problem is poor leadership. His solution? Himself. In late 1808, he personally crosses the Pyrenees at the head of a new army, nearly 300,000 strong. The emperor's presence electrifies his troops. Within weeks, he smashes several Spanish armies and retakes Madrid. For a moment, it looks as though the fire will be stamped out, but it isn't. You can't kill an idea with cannonballs. Napoleon soon returns to France, drawn by larger ambitions in Central Europe. He leaves behind garrisons to restore order, trusting the generals will manage. They don't. The moment his boots leave Spanish soil, the uprisings flare again. French columns march endlessly from town to town, subduing one province only to see another erupt behind them. One French officer writes in despair, "We have conquered the ground we stand on, nothing more." In Aragon, the French burn whole districts. In Catalonia, they hang suspected rebels. In Andalusia, they requisition grain and shoot anyone caught hiding it. Yet the more they punish, the stronger the defiance becomes. You wander through a smoldering hamlet where villagers rebuild a church from ashes, hammering its bell back into shape with bits of musket barrel. They call it La Campana de la Libertad, the bell of freedom. Each time it rings, the French cringe, for it means another ambush has begun somewhere in the hills. You notice how faith and vengeance have intertwined. Every sermon now sounds half prayer, half war cry. A priest waves a crucifix in one hand and a musket in the other. To outsiders, it looks fanatic. To the Spaniards, it's justice. Historians still debate whether this religious fervor was a unifying force or a curse that blinded the rebels to diplomacy. But tonight, under flickering candlelight, you can't deny its power. From the balcony of a ruined monastery, you watch columns of smoke mark the horizon. Villages burning, both French and Spanish. The war has begun to devour civilians as much as soldiers. Somewhere, a child coughs in the dust. You catch yourself thinking, revolutions sound noble in proclamations, but look awful in person. Then a woman hands you a crust of bread and whispers, "For Spain." And somehow, the misery feels meaningful again. Let's slip a moment of levity into the chaos. A mule driver beside you complains that his donkey deserves a medal for surviving 4 sieges. "The beast has better sense than any general," he mutters, patting its neck. You can't argue. The donkey brays like it agrees. In a war of madness, small humor is sanity's last defense. Back in Madrid, Joseph Bonaparte writes to his brother that the Spanish are an ungovernable people. His ministers drink imported French wine and pretend not to hear the distant gunfire. He plans city reforms, new schools, a national theater, but no one attends. The capital feels hollow, a puppet stage with no audience. You wander its empty avenues and realize that even when the French hold Madrid, they do not possess Spain. The resistance now grows beyond borders. Across the frontier in Portugal, similar fires ignite. There, the Portuguese people, less numerous but no less determined, join the swelling chorus of defiance. The Iberian Peninsula is becoming a trap, an entire region turning itself into a weapon. By the winter of 1809, Spain is divided into zones of rebellion and occupation, often changing hands by the week. The French hold the major cities. The countryside belongs to no one. Couriers vanish, roads become ambush sites, and the rumor of British landings adds another twist to the madness. It's no longer clear who is winning. One evening, you sit with a wounded guerrillero beside a dying campfire. His face is gaunt, eyes hollow, but when he speaks of Zaragoza, his voice is steady. "They thought we were finished, but the dead fight with us now." He stares into the flames as if listening to ghosts. Maybe he's just exhausted, or maybe Spain truly has learned to fight through memory. A cold wind rises, carrying the smell of gunpowder from distant battles. You realize that this isn't a conventional war at all. It's something raw, tribal, and unstoppable. Napoleon may claim victory after victory on parchment, but on the ground, Spain belongs to no emperor. As you drift to sleep beneath the stars, you recall the words of an anonymous French soldier scrawled on a ruined wall. "Here begins hell." He meant it as despair. The Spanish would later repeat it as pride. The fire that began in Madrid now burns across the land, consuming armies, faith, and reason alike. And somehow, amid the ruin, hope glows brighter than ever. You awake to the sharp crack of a musket somewhere beyond the olive groves. The air smells of cordite and rain-soaked earth, the kind that clings to boots and memories. The French columns have begun their morning march again, but this time, they're not facing regular troops in neat lines. They're walking straight into history's first true guerrilla war. The word guerrilla itself, little war, is born here in the dust of Iberia, whispered by terrified officers and shouted with pride by farmers who've swapped plows for muskets. From a hilltop, you can see it unfold. A French supply convoy winding through a narrow pass, wagons creaking, soldiers scanning the ridges. Then, nothing but silence. A moment later, shots explode from every side. The hillside comes alive with smoke and echoes. Irregular fighters, men, boys, even cloaked women, dart among the rocks, vanishing before the French can form ranks. A drumbeat of hooves follows as the attackers disappear into the scrub, leaving shattered wagons and echoes behind. 10 minutes of chaos and an entire day's supply line is gone. Historians still argue whether the guerrilla war was truly coordinated or just 1,000 local feuds stitched together by hatred. What's undeniable is that it works. Napoleon's disciplined machine, designed for open field battles, now bleeds to death one ambush at a time. By 1810, the French are losing tens of thousands, not in glorious charges, but in lonely roadside skirmishes, each one too small to matter individually, yet together, fatal. You join a band of these partisans, ragged men with mismatched weapons, saints' medals hanging beside stolen pistols. Their leader, a wiry veteran named El Empecinado, strides barefoot through the mud, his rifle slung across his shoulder like a walking stick. He has no uniform, no supply train, just a network of villagers who feed and hide his men. At night, you share a meal of stale bread and onions under the stars. One fighter jokes that Napoleon might control the map, but they control the space between the lines. Everyone laughs, quietly. A mainstream historical fact anchors this chaos. The French army in Spain, once 300,000 strong, finds nearly half its forces tied down, guarding roads and convoys instead of fighting major battles. As one of Napoleon's marshals admits, we are not at war with armies, but with a people. That people have turned their landscape into a weapon. You trudge through mountain passes so narrow even donkeys must walk single file. Every ravine hides a threat. Every chapel bell might signal an ambush. The French are forced to march in tighter formations, but that just makes them bigger targets. When the weather turns, mud traps their cannons and rot claims their food. You overhear a young officer muttering that the Iberian Peninsula itself seems cursed, a god-forsaken labyrinth that swallows men whole. Somewhere near Salamanca, you encounter a French messenger captured by guerrillas. He's trembling, half-starved, expecting torture. Instead, they strip him of his fine boots and hand him a pair of crude sandals. "Now you'll march like the rest of us," one of them jokes. Dark humor, but not cruelty. They send him hobbling back to his lines, a warning more potent than any execution. A quirky tidbit: British newspapers later romanticized these fighters as noble patriots, printing exaggerated tales of heroic ambushes. One even claims a single peasant woman captured an entire platoon with a pitchfork. Truth or propaganda, it keeps morale alive across the channel. At dawn, you move with a small band toward a ruined monastery overlooking the valley. The men whisper prayers before battle, not for victory, but for forgiveness. The war's brutality is reshaping their souls. After the ambush, they vanish into the fog again. One leaves behind a small wooden cross carved from a musket stock, a silent offering to balance the sin of killing. You pocket it, unsure whether it's a relic or a confession. By now, the French soldiers grow paranoid. Every peasant could be a spy, every mule a trap. Reprisals become the rule. Villages suspected of aiding guerrillas are torched. Priests are executed. Fields salted. The invaders' discipline frays under the weight of endless, unseen enemies. You overhear an exhausted grenadier whisper to his comrade, "We conquer the land by day, and they take it back by night." One rainy evening, a group of French dragoons rides through a deserted hamlet. They find bread baking in the oven, but no people. Suspicious, they rest in a barn, until it explodes. Hidden powder kegs. The blast throws you into the mud, ears ringing, as flames consume the rafters. From the tree line, you glimpse shadowy figures watching. Villagers, not soldiers, faces lit by the fire's glow. The message is clear. Spain will feed her guests only ashes. Even Napoleon's marshals, hardened by campaigns from Egypt to Prussia, write home in despair. Suchet complains he must fight the war of shadows. Soult laments that every victory feels hollow. "We take cities," he writes, "but never peace." The emperor himself, far away in Paris, dismisses these letters as excuses. He tells his brother Joseph to govern with firmness and justice, but you can sense that firmness has already turned into cruelty. Amid the violence, moments of eerie tenderness emerge. You share a campfire with a French sergeant who confesses he once loved Spain. The music, the wine, the warmth. Now it hates me, he says, staring into the flames. And I think it's right too. He offers you a sip from his flask, half smile, half apology. Then he disappears into the night patrol, swallowed by rain. Scholars still debate the guerrillas' true effectiveness. Did they defeat Napoleon by themselves, or merely distract him? The answer lies somewhere between myth and mud. What can't be denied is that their persistence forces the French to spread thin, leaving openings for larger armies to strike. Every ambush, every roadside skirmish is a thread tugged from the emperor's grand design. You trek south toward Andalusia, where olive groves stretch like a green sea. Here, the war takes on a rhythm: raid, reprisal, rebuild, repeat. The peasants know the terrain better than any map. They melt into caves when French patrols approach, emerging at dusk to sabotage wagons. The sound of distant musket fire has become the peninsula's heartbeat. There's a peculiar irony to it all. Napoleon, the architect of modern warfare, finds himself undone by something medieval. The same peasants he called ignorant now wield the future's first asymmetrical strategy. You can almost hear history chuckling. One night, as you lie beneath the stars, a young guerrilla named Tomas tells you he dreams of peace, not triumph, just stillness. We want our children to hear silence again, he says. His words drift into the night like smoke, soft and sad. In that moment, you realize something profound. This little war is enormous not because of the battles, but because of its humanity. Every fighter, every widow, every terrified farmer hiding a musket under the bed. They've turned survival into resistance, and their defiance, though invisible on Napoleon's maps, will outlast his empire. When dawn breaks, the valley below glows with mist. French columns trudge along the road, unaware they're being watched from every ridge. You can feel the tension building like a held breath. Somewhere, a church bell rings once, twice. Then gunfire shatters the silence. And so, the world learns a new word: guerrilla. A little war, yes, but one that will echo through centuries, teaching armies from Moscow to Vietnam what happens when ordinary people decide they've had enough. The morning fog hangs low over the mountains, curling between olive trees like ghosts reluctant to leave. You move with a band of partisans, barefoot men wrapped in cloaks, faces half hidden beneath broad hats. They call themselves Los Hermanos del Monte, the Brothers of the Hills. You carry no banner, no uniform, only the quiet understanding that every ridge, every ravine, every patch of scrubland is both home and weapon. Below, a French convoy winds its way through the valley, a dozen wagons creaking under barrels of grain and powder, escorted by blue-coated dragoons. Their boots glisten with dew, their bayonets catching stray rays of sunlight. You crouch behind a boulder as the leader, old Matteo, raises his hand. The world holds its breath. Then comes the signal, a hawk's cry from the opposite slope. The hills erupt. Gunfire cracks like thunder. Stones and branches tumble onto the road. Horses rear. Men shout in French and Basque alike. One wagon tips, spilling sacks of flour that burst into ghostly clouds. In seconds, visibility drops to nothing. You fire, reload, fire again, heart hammering in rhythm with the echoes. By the time the smoke clears, half the convoy lies in ruin. The survivors flee, abandoning their supplies. The ambushers melt into the mist, leaving behind only silence and the faint laughter of men who have turned defiance into an art form. That's how it always goes. A flicker of violence, then disappearance. The French call it cowardice. The guerrillas call it wisdom. Why fight giants in daylight, Matteo murmurs, when the mountains fight for you at night? Historians still argue whether this hit-and-run war was strategy or necessity. You suspect it's both. You march all night, feet sore, bellies empty. A shepherd offers bread and wine, refusing payment. You fight for Spain, he says simply. Hospitality replaces currency in a country where gold has no meaning left. Somewhere in the distance, church bells toll, not for mass but to warn of patrols. At dawn, the band hides in a canyon where a small stream runs beneath orange trees. The air smells of smoke from distant fires. You watch as one fighter, young Diego, pulls a French button from his pocket and nails it to a tree. A trophy maybe, or a prayer. Every button is a step closer to home, he grins. You can't tell if he's joking or reassuring himself. A mainstream fact echoes in your mind. By 1811, the French have lost control of nearly all rural Spain. They still hold the cities, Madrid, Seville, Burgos, but the countryside belongs to no one but ghosts and guerrillas. Supply convoys vanish as if swallowed by the earth. Of the 500,000 French soldiers sent to Iberia during the war, nearly half will die or disappear. The land itself becomes a graveyard of empire. The French adapt, or try to. Columns grow smaller. Officers rely on spies. Entire villages are deported for suspected sympathy. But even fear loses its grip after so much blood. You pass through a burned village where the only living thing is a stray dog. Ribs like blades, nosing through ash. On a ruined wall, someone has scrawled with charcoal, "No hay paz mientras quede un francés." There will be no peace while one Frenchman remains. The message feels carved into the soul of the country itself. Still, you sense the toll on both sides. For every ambush that succeeds, there are reprisals. Whole families vanish overnight. The French army, stretched thin, begins to live off the land like bandits. A captain you meet later in the campaign tells you that half his men are barefoot, their uniforms little more than rags. "We march for glory," he mutters, "but eat like thieves." You trudge on through villages where houses double as hospitals. The wounded lie on straw pallets, faces pale under candlelight. Women move between them like ghosts, spooning water into cracked lips. A priest blesses each dying man, Spanish or French. It doesn't seem to matter anymore. War has blurred the line between enemy and human. Yet, even in this ruin, strange friendships flicker. One night, you meet a captured French corporal whose life was spared by a guerrilla surgeon. "He cut the bullet from my leg," the man says, disbelief softening his accent. "Then he fed me soup." He shakes his head. "I do not understand your people." Neither, perhaps, do the Spaniards themselves. A quirky detail surfaces in your wandering. Local children begin collecting spent musket balls, stringing them into necklaces as charms. They call them bolas de la suerte, lucky balls. Some even believe swallowing one before battle will make you invincible. It doesn't, of course, but the belief says everything about this world, where superstition and courage have merged into the same language. Evening falls over the Sierra de Gredos. You camp beside a crumbling chapel whose bell tower still stands despite the war. Lightning flickers on the horizon. The sound of distant drums drifts through the valleys. French troops, somewhere out there, moving again, endlessly. You can almost feel their exhaustion echoing your own. Among your companions, songs rise. Low, mournful, half prayer, half lullaby. The lyrics speak of lovers waiting in villages long burned down, of saints who turn bullets into raindrops. It's not courage they sing of, but endurance. The melody carries through the night, mingling with the wind. Historians still debate whether the guerrilla movement had a leader, or if it was simply Spain itself, rebelling in 1,000 voices. You think of Mateo, Diego, the nameless priest, the woman hiding a musket under her shawl. They are the same story told through different mouths. Then, an interruption. The distant clatter of hooves. A patrol maybe. You douse the fire and wait. The moon slides behind clouds, leaving only outlines. Minutes feel like hours. The riders pass, cursing softly in French, unaware of eyes watching from every rock. When they vanish, someone exhales a laugh. Quiet, shaky. The laughter of those who have survived one more night. By morning, you're back on the move. The road winds past terraced vineyards and abandoned fields. Somewhere nearby, a rooster crows, defiantly alive. You pass a farmer kneeling in the dirt, planting new vines beside the burnt ones. "We fight our war too," he says without looking up. You realize he's right. The act of rebuilding, of sowing again, is its own rebellion. A drizzle starts, turning dust to clay. You slip, curse, laugh. Even in war, gravity doesn't care who's winning. One of the men jokes that if Napoleon himself walked these roads, the mud would pull him down just as quick. It's funny, but also true. The emperor's glory has no power here. Later that day, word reaches you of a French courier captured near the Guadarrama Pass. Among his papers are letters filled with dread, officers begging for reinforcements, reports of whole companies gone missing, requests for more coffins. One line stands out: "Spain devours us." You can almost hear Napoleon's fury when he reads it. By nightfall, your group finds refuge in a shepherd's hut overlooking a ravine. You huddle around a small fire, sharing a jug of sour wine. Matteo tears a piece of bread, offers it to you first, a gesture that feels like communion. "They think we are criminals," he says, gazing into the flames. "Maybe we are, but even criminals have homes." You listen to the crackle of wood, to rain tapping against the roof. Outside, the war continues in unseen ways. Somewhere a French outpost is attacked. Somewhere a bridge is blown. Somewhere a mother whispers her son's name to an empty bed. The whole country hums with resistance, a living organism of pain and pride. And as you drift into uneasy sleep, you think of the French soldiers trudging through this same rain, cold and hungry, haunted by shadows they can never catch. Both sides trapped in the same nightmare, yet dreaming of different dawns. Spain breathes in the dark, wounded but awake. Its hills cradle the whispers of a new kind of warfare, silent, patient, endless. You close your eyes, knowing this is only the beginning. You're jolted awake by the low groan of cartwheels in mud and the clink of sabers hitting buckles. Down the slope, a column of French soldiers lurches forward like ghosts, gray-faced, hollow-eyed, soaked through by another merciless Iberian rain. The road beneath them is no road at all, just ruts carved by months of retreat and pursuit. Supply wagons tilt, mules stumble, drivers curse in half a dozen dialects. The drums that once beat time for imperial parades now thud weakly, more funeral march than fanfare. This is what conquest has become: slogging hunger, sleepless terror, and letters home that never reach their destination. Napoleon's officers once promised they'd subdue the peninsula in a season. It's now the 5th year of a war that refuses to end. "Spain," mutters a corporal trudging past, "is a mouth that eats armies." He's not wrong. The problem begins with geography. From Galicia's rain-lashed mountains to the baking plains of La Mancha, Spain is a nightmare for logistics. You follow a group of engineers trying to rebuild a bridge washed away for the 3rd time that month. Their ropes snap, the planks crack, and one man mutters a prayer that somehow manages to insult both God and the emperor. The French army was built for open plains and fast campaigns. Here, every hill hides enemies and every river demands rebuilding. A mainstream historical fact sets the scene. Napoleon's army consumes roughly 30,000 tons of supplies a month in Iberia. To feed that appetite, convoys crawl from Bayonne through the Pyrenees, each wagon guarded as if it carried treasure. And in a sense, it does: bread, powder, and hope. But the further south they go, the thinner those lifelines stretch. Guerrillas pounce on them daily. By the time food reaches the front, half is spoiled or stolen. You watch a captain open a barrel, expecting flour and finding dust crawling with weevils. He laughs bitterly and says, "Bon appetit, my friends." Someone mutters about eating mule meat again. Historians still argue whether the French suffered more from combat or starvation. The soldiers themselves had no such doubts. The rot spreads beyond food. Boots disintegrate in the mud. Horses die faster than they can be replaced, and uniforms hang in tatters. Officers who once polished their epaulets with pride now wrap rags around bleeding feet. At one campfire, a sergeant brags he's invented a new recipe: stew of leather straps boiled with onion peels. Delicious, he insists. You politely decline. Napoleon's system, efficient on paper, relied on local requisitioning. But requisitioning turns to theft when the locals refuse cooperation. French patrols march into villages demanding grain and leave behind smoldering ruins. The next night, the same villagers join the guerrillas. It's an endless circle of hunger and vengeance. A quirky detail. In desperation, some French soldiers begin baking bread from acorn flour, a trick they learn by spying on peasants. It tastes like wet wood and despair, but it keeps them alive. Others trade buttons or spare cartridges for eggs. Money means nothing. Trust is the only currency left, and there's none to spare. You ride with a courier named Lefebvre, tasked with delivering orders between Burgos and Salamanca. A 3-day journey that's become a gamble. We don't need dice, he says, patting his pistol. The roads roll them for us. He points out burned wagons and skulls whitening in the ditches. The guerrillas never bury the dead. They let the sight do the talking. When Lefebvre finally reaches his destination, he opens the dispatch pouch, empty. They rob me of the papers, he sighs, and leave my life. Even thieves have pity here. In the officers' tents, bitterness grows. One complains that he's fighting a nation of phantoms. You kill them in the hills, and they reappear behind you. Another blames Napoleon for draining resources into his new obsession, the Russian campaign. We bleed here, so he may freeze there, he sneers. It's gallows humor, but it stings. Indeed, as 1812 dawns, France's attention shifts eastward. Reinforcements meant for Spain march toward Moscow instead, and Iberia becomes a forgotten wound. Colonel Noel, whose letters you read by flickering candlelight, writes, "We are left to rot among mountains and madmen. The emperor dreams of empire, we dream of bread." Scholars still debate whether Napoleon underestimated the logistical nightmare or simply couldn't afford to care. Either way, the result is the same. His armies in Spain begin to die not in battle, but by inches. Typhus rips through camps, horses drop in fields, and the once mighty Grande Armée of the West turns into an army of beggars with muskets. You walk through one such encampment at dusk. The stench is unbearable. Dead mules, unwashed bodies, wet uniforms. A surgeon leans over a patient and mutters, "Another amputation," as though discussing the weather. Nearby, a soldier boils his last shoe for soup. He offers you a taste. You decline again. Despite the misery, fragments of humanity persist. A group of drummers carve little toys from firewood for village children. An officer shares his wine with a captured partisan, toasting ironically to better roads. For a moment, laughter replaces hatred, fragile but real. Then a messenger arrives with bad news. Another convoy ambushed, another bridge gone, and the spell breaks. The French try to adapt with brutal efficiency. They build fortified depots every few leagues, linking them like beads across the map. But these require men to guard, draining forces from the front. You realize the irony. Every fortress they build to protect themselves also cages them further in. Spain becomes a labyrinth of walls without exits. Meanwhile, discipline collapses. Units separated by storms or ambushes wander for weeks, surviving on stolen corn and superstition. Drunken brawls erupt. Deserters form gangs that rob both sides. One night, you stumble upon a group of them singing a warped version of La Marseillaise, the lyrics replaced with insults toward every general in France. It's funny until you see the dead lieutenant hanging from a tree behind them. As dawn creeps over the Sierra, a ragged column of replacements arrives. Boys from the Loire, barely shaving. Their sergeant tries to inspire them. "Spain is a paradise," he cries. Then his mule collapses mid-sentence. The laughter that follows is hollow. You can't help comparing this misery to Napoleon's immaculate portraits, the marble statues, the heroic poses. Here, in the mud, his glory is rotting. The emperor might still dream of destiny, but his soldiers dream only of a meal that doesn't bite back. Somewhere in the distance, you hear cannon fire. Wellington's Anglo-Portuguese army pressing north, inch by inch. Each French setback feeds the sense of inevitability. One officer writes in his journal, "Even victory feels like loss. The land itself mocks us." Later, you meet a veteran of Austerlitz, now commanding a supply depot near Toledo. His uniform is patched with canvas, his sword nicked to dullness. "I fought the Russians, the Austrians, the Prussians," he says, staring at the horizon. "But I fear the Spaniard most. He kills you slowly, like the sun." He gestures to the barren fields and adds, "And he never stops shining." There's black comedy, even in despair. One French cook proudly declares he can turn anything into a meal, then serves stew made from candle wax and horse bones. "Bon goût de victoire," he grins. "You try it. It's exactly as awful as it sounds." As weeks stretch into months, the soldiers stop writing dates on letters. Time here has no shape, just rain, dust, and loss. When news finally comes of Napoleon's disaster in Russia, the rumor spreads through the ranks like wildfire. The invincible emperor has bled in the snow just as they bleed in the mud. For the first time, they whisper of going home. A cold wind cuts through camp that night. Fires sputter. Somewhere, a band begins playing a slow tune on a battered fiddle, a lullaby from Provence. Men hum along, some crying quietly. You realize this, more than any ambush, is Spain's true weapon: exhaustion that seeps into the bones. A war that erases the idea of victory itself. When you finally drift to sleep, the sound of distant thunder might be storms or guns. Hard to tell anymore. Either way, the French dream of bread, the guerrillas dream of freedom, and Spain dreams of being left alone. And as the sun rises over another broken convoy, you understand the grim truth Colonel Noel once wrote. Spain does not fight us. She starves us. The rain has stopped, leaving the Portuguese coast washed clean under a pale dawn. You stand on a narrow strand of sand, the surf whispering against the hulls of British troopships. Red-coated soldiers file ashore, boots sinking into the wet grit, muskets slung, faces grim. They've come from another world, green fields, orderly drill, clipped accents, and they're about to learn what Iberia does to tidy plans. These are the men of the 95th Rifles, Wellington's green-jacketed ghosts, armed with Baker rifles that can pick off a man at 200 yards. They are different from the rest of the army, faster, looser, quietly professional. In time, they will become legends. You follow them inland toward Lisbon, the air alive with the tramp of boots and the bark of orders. The British have arrived, not as conquerors, but as saviors, or so they believe. Their mission is simple on paper: drive the French from Portugal, rally the Portuguese army, and eventually liberate Spain. But nothing in Iberia is ever simple. The Portuguese countryside seems peaceful from a distance, but every farmhouse hides grief. Every village still smolders from past reprisals. A mainstream historical fact: the 95th Rifles, part of Sir Arthur Wellesley's light infantry, were among the first to test modern skirmish tactics in the Peninsular War. Instead of lining up shoulder to shoulder, they move in loose order, using cover and communication, an innovation that will shape warfare for a century. As you watch them spread across the hills, the green coats melt into the landscape. From afar, it looks like the forest itself is taking aim. You march with them through the rocky roads north of Coimbra. The British columns stretch for miles, a river of men and mules. The smell is a mix of leather, sweat, and gun oil. Bloody paradise, one private mutters as he swats flies from his face. His comrade laughs. At least the wine's cheap. A moment of levity in a world that offers few. You pass a Portuguese farm where the family lines up to watch the soldiers go by. An old woman crosses herself. A child waves timidly. A rooster crows as if cheering the march. They think we'll save them, the lieutenant beside you murmurs. God help us if we don't. As evening falls, the rifles bivouac on a hillside overlooking a river. The camp hums with the small, ordinary rituals of survival. Men scraping boots clean, boiling coffee, patching socks. A sergeant sharpens his bayonet and tells a joke about how French bullets always miss the British because they're too busy stealing chickens. Everyone laughs. Humor is the last line of defense. Historians still argue whether Wellington's men were truly as disciplined as legend suggests. Private journals tell a messier truth. Brawls in taverns, looting, drunkenness, homesick tears muffled in the dark. You glimpse it all here. A drummer boy hides a locket with a woman's hair. Another soldier draws his own grave marker on a scrap of paper, just in case. For every tale of glory, there are a dozen of exhaustion. You wake before dawn to the low whistle of the bugler and the muttered curses of men shrugging into damp jackets. The army is moving again, toward the interior, toward the French. The road winds through pine woods that smell faintly of sap and smoke. Ahead lies the border with Spain, and beyond it, the grinding heart of the war. By mid-morning, you reach a ridge overlooking the valley of the Mondego. Below, French scouts probe the river crossings, sleek and precise as chess pieces. The rifles fan out in 2s and 3s, taking cover behind stone walls. You crouch beside one sharpshooter, a lanky Irishman named Cooper, as he steadies his rifle. Wind from the west, he murmurs, licking his finger. A shot rings out. One French horseman tumbles from the saddle. One less mouth to feed, Cooper grins. That single crack of a rifle marks a turning point. The French, who once marched unopposed, now find themselves hunted by invisible foes. Every step into Portugal meets resistance. The British light troops perfect the art of retreating to fight another day. When pressed, they fall back behind the lines of Torres Vedras, a masterpiece of fortification built under Wellington's eye, stretching 50 miles and bristling with redoubts. A quirky fact: these lines are so well hidden that even French spies can't map them accurately. Peasants spread rumors that the hills themselves are armed. You walk those lines one twilight, tracing earthen walls dug by hand, each ditch filled with rainwater. Soldiers move silently, laying traps and false trails. Wellington's chessboard, one engineer calls it. It's brilliant and brutal. If the French advance, they'll starve. If they retreat, they'll be hunted. You realize that here, strategy isn't about winning battles. It's about letting the land itself fight. The French do come in 1810 under Marshal Massena, veteran of a dozen campaigns. His army numbers over 60,000 men, gleaming with confidence. They cross into Portugal, expecting another easy victory. Instead, they find a wasteland. Villagers burn their crops and flee into the hills. Wells are poisoned, bridges destroyed, every field stripped bare. When Massena's columns reach the lines of Torres Vedras, they find nothing but fog and starvation. You stand on a hill beside a British officer watching through a spyglass. "They'll never break it," he says, and he's right. For months, the French camp before the lines, gnawing on dead horses, their uniforms rotting from rain. Typhus creeps through the tents. In one letter, a French soldier writes, "We are ghosts in daylight." Finally, Massena retreats, his once proud army reduced to skeletons. The British cheer, but Wellington remains calm. The war is not won, he tells his staff, only prolonged. He's cautious, methodical, perhaps even cold, but in this land, patience is worth more than heroism. Historians still debate whether he was a genius or merely lucky. You suspect both. You follow the 95th Rifles as they press forward in the following campaigns. Their green coats fade to brown from dust, their rifles patched with rope and cloth. They learn Portuguese words, share wine with peasants, adopt stray dogs as mascots. They joke that they've become half gorilla themselves. "The French chase us," one rifleman laughs, "and the Spaniards chase them, round and round, until someone runs out of legs. Yet amid the humor, the toll is visible. Men limp from old wounds, their eyes hollow from what they've seen. One young rifleman named Harris confides to you by the fire, "You stop thinking of victory, you think of surviving tomorrow." His words stick with you. A mainstream figure of the war, Private Thomas Harris, will later write one of history's most vivid memoirs of soldiering in Spain, describing not grand tactics, but mud, fear, and the strange intimacy of death. "I felt," he wrote, "as if the war had entered my bones." Listening to him now, you understand. Night deepens. The fire crackles softly. Around you, the green jackets sleep sprawled in the dirt, rifles within reach. The wind carries the faint scent of salt and rosemary. For a moment, the war feels far away, just stars and breathing men, dreamless and still. Then, from somewhere down the valley, a cannon booms and everyone stirs. Someone mutters, "Back to paradise." Laughter, then silence again. Tomorrow they'll march east toward Spain proper, towards Salamanca, Badajoz, and years more of hardship. But tonight, on this quiet hill in Portugal, you can almost believe the world might heal. You roll onto your side, listening to the rhythmic snores of the camp, and think of the strange fellowship forged here. English, Irish, Scots, Portuguese, Spaniards, men who share nothing but hunger, danger, and a cause. They are not the conquerors Napoleon's bulletins warned of. They are the weary counterweight to empire, a mosaic of endurance stitched together by necessity. And as the last embers die, you realize something gentle amid the grit. Even in a war born of tyranny and pride, these green-coated ghosts have learned how to fight with purpose, and sometimes that's enough. The night is thick with smoke and rain when you find yourself huddled behind a stone wall beside the men of the 95th. The mud sucks at your boots, each breath filled with the tang of burnt powder and something metallic. Fear, maybe, or blood. Ahead lies the shattered village of Fuentes de Oñoro, and the French are coming again. Muskets crack like breaking twigs, and flashes of orange strobe across the darkness. You can't see the enemy, only hear their drums, a heartbeat echoing through the fog. Private Harris is there, crouched beside you, his rifle propped on the stones. He's older now, his hands rough, his humor darker. "Never thought I'd miss the rain of England," he mutters, sighting down his barrel. Then, more softly, "At least that rain didn't shoot back." He fires. Somewhere out there, a Frenchman falls. The world pauses just long enough for you to reload. When dawn comes, the village looks like a ghost's jaw. Rows of roofless houses, chimneys like teeth. British and Portuguese soldiers move through the rubble, stepping over bodies, scavenging cartridges. The air hums with the buzzing of flies. One man sits in the mud, trying to light his pipe with shaking hands. Another stares at his own boots, as if surprised they're still attached to him. You realize then, this is what endurance looks like. Muddy, trembling, and still standing. A mainstream historical fact. The Battle of Fuentes de Oñoro in May 1811 was one of Wellington's toughest tests. Outnumbered, his Anglo-Portuguese army held off Marshal Massena's assault in brutal street fighting. The 95th Rifles earned particular fame for their defense among the ruins, buying precious hours for the army to hold its line. It wasn't a sweeping victory, but it proved that the French were no longer unstoppable. As you wander through the wreckage, you overhear fragments of conversation. A wounded Portuguese soldier praying to St. Anthony for the strength to crawl home. A Scottish sergeant joking that the French are good lads, always bring their own gunpowder. Someone laughs, too loud, too long. War twists humor into something brittle, but it keeps men sane. Harris sits cleaning his rifle, a strip of cloth between his teeth. "They say the Emperor himself will come," he says, not looking up. "I say let him. I'll shoot him like any other." He spits out the cloth and adds, "Mind you, I'd aim for the hat, too fine to miss." It's gallows wit, but his grin cracks the tension like sunlight through fog. Historians still argue how much of Harris's later memoir is true and how much was polished by time. But what matters isn't accuracy, it's honesty. He captures the texture of war better than any report. The smell of damp powder, the dread of cavalry thundering in the mist, the ridiculousness of dying for a hill no one can pronounce. You follow the rifles eastward, across the scorched plains of Castile. The heat comes now, oppressive and endless. Horses collapse mid-march, tongues swollen, flanks slick with flies. Men march in silence, heads down, each footstep a prayer for shade. In villages long abandoned, they find only ghosts, empty cradles, burned churches, the echo of laughter that fled years ago. One evening, as the sun bleeds into the horizon, the regiment halts by a small river. The men wash their faces, toss pebbles at fish, pretend the war is elsewhere. A Portuguese girl appears, barefoot, carrying a basket of figs. She moves through the camp, silent as a shadow, offering fruit to anyone who smiles. Harris takes one, bows, and says something clumsy in Portuguese that makes her laugh. For a fleeting second, there's peace. Then the bugle sounds, and she vanishes back into the trees. You feel the loss like a physical thing. That night, around the fire, the men trade stories. One tells of a French drummer boy spared by the rifles because he played a tune they liked. Another recalls a comrade who claimed to see angels over Badajoz. Or maybe it was just the smoke, someone jokes. You realize these small tales are how they survive, by shaping horror into something that can be spoken aloud. A quirky tidbit: the green jackets of the 95th were so distinct that even guerrillas sometimes refused to ambush them, mistaking them for allies. There's even a rumor of a French patrol that surrendered to them voluntarily, believing the men were ghosts. Whether true or not, it fits. The rifles seem half real now, wraiths moving through a land half destroyed. The brutality of war doesn't end with the fighting. You arrive in a ruined village the next day, and what you see there silences even the hardiest soldier. Houses gutted, wells poisoned, the smell of rot everywhere. A dog whimpers beside what used to be its owner's doorstep. Harris kneels, scratches its ear, and murmurs, "War's no place for you, mate." He slips it a scrap of bread and moves on. You follow, unable to speak. Historians still debate whether atrocities like these were systematic or spontaneous, the product of orders or of chaos. To the people living through it, such questions are meaningless. All they know is pain. The French burn villages to deny shelter to the guerrillas. The guerrillas retaliate with ambushes and executions. Everyone loses count of who started it. Later that week, you pass through Salamanca, its sandstone cathedrals shining in the evening light, eerily untouched. The city feels asleep rather than alive, as if waiting for another round of destruction. In a tavern, a British officer lifts his glass and says, "To survival!" No one toasts victory anymore. The letters that leave the front are shorter now, just fragments of longing. "My dearest Anne, we sleep in fields but dream of beds. The stars here are bright enough to blind you." One man seals his note with blood because wax is impossible to find. It's half poetry, half exhaustion. One night, Harris confides that he's stopped keeping count of battles. "They blur together," he says, staring into the fire. "The only thing that changes is the names of the dead." He falls silent for a long time, then adds softly, "Still, I reckon it's better than sitting at home wondering what you might have been." You sense the strange pride buried beneath the weariness, a quiet conviction that being here, however awful, means something. A sudden shout cuts the stillness. A sentry has spotted movement in the dark. Muskets rise, hearts pound. Then, from the trees, a band of guerrillas emerges, ragged but grinning. They carry wine and a captured French drum. Cheers erupt, hands clasp, jokes fly in a dozen languages. The wine is shared, the drum beaten until dawn. For one night, the war belongs to laughter. As morning light spills across the hills, you see it clearly. camaraderie born from chaos, resilience forged in mud and fear. The 95th Rifles march again, their rifles slung over shoulders, humming a tune you can't name. Their footprints vanish in the dust almost as soon as they're made. But you know this much, they'll be remembered, not as conquerors or saviors, but as men who walk through hell and refuse to stop. And somewhere behind them, the ghost of Private Harris lingers, whistling softly, rifle in hand, a man who learned that even in a war built on madness, decency can still take aim. The guns fade behind you as the army moves on. But war doesn't end, it just changes shape. You ride ahead with a small British column crossing into Galicia, where the road becomes a river of refugees. Wagons creak under bundles of linen, mothers clutch infants wrapped in shawls, and old men lean on sticks, eyes glazed with exhaustion. These are not soldiers, yet their faces carry the same haunted look you've seen on every battlefield. The civilians' war, as it's quietly called, has no uniforms or glory. It's fought in hunger, in whispers, in the desperate decision of whether to stay or flee. You pass a group of villagers from Corcubillon moving west toward the coast. They've heard the French are burning everything inland. Their oxen drag carts piled with what's left of their lives: bedding, pots, a single caged hen. One boy carries a wooden crucifix almost his own height. His mother walks barefoot beside him, humming a lullaby she can't finish. The air smells of salt and smoke. Somewhere ahead lies the Atlantic and the hope of safety, or at least distance. But even here, fear lingers. The French army might appear at any time. The guerrillas might strike, too. In the Peninsular War, there is no safe side. A mainstream historical fact: Spain's civilian population suffered unimaginably. Between 1808 and 1814, more than 500,000 non-combatants died. Starvation, disease, reprisals, crossfire. Cities like Zaragoza were reduced to rubble, villages emptied, farmland destroyed. Historians still debate exact numbers, but none dispute the scale of suffering. For every soldier who marched, 10 civilians lost everything. As night falls, you arrive in Corcubillon, a small fishing town battered by wind. The docks are crowded with people begging for passage on any ship that will take them. Some are Portuguese trying to return home, others are Spaniards hoping to reach England. The harbor stinks of fish, tar, and desperation. An old sailor mutters, "The sea takes everyone in the end. Might as well choose when." You help a young couple load their few belongings onto a boat. A trunk, a mattress, a family Bible. "We'll be back when it's over," the man insists. His wife doesn't answer. Her eyes are fixed on the burning glow far inland. For her, home is already gone. The next morning, you travel with a British supply convoy heading toward La Coruña. Along the way, you see what the maps don't show: the aftermath: burned mills, broken churches, orchards hacked to stumps. A donkey wanders through an abandoned village, braying for company. On one wall, someone has scratched, "Gone to the mountains. God help us." You stop at a farmhouse where a family hides in the cellar. The father offers you wine. The mother, trembling, asks if the French are close. You don't have the heart to answer. A child sleeps in her lap, clutching a toy carved from a musket ball. A quirky, chilling detail. The locals call such keepsakes war babies. They trade them like talismans, believing the souls of the dead protect them. The brutality isn't confined to armies anymore. You hear stories: French patrols cutting throats in reprisal for ambushes, guerrillas burning captives alive in barns. It's a cycle too old to break. Even priests have become executioners. One confessor, a kindly man with blood on his robe, tells you, "God forgives us because the French never would." You don't argue. Historians still argue whether this total breakdown of mercy was inevitable or avoidable. Some claim Napoleon's men brought it upon themselves through arrogance. Others blame local fanaticism. Standing here amid the ashes, those debates feel meaningless. The war has become a fever that burns logic away. You reach the outskirts of Betanzos and find the road clogged with both armies. British troops retreating north, civilians mixed among them. Horses scream, wagons overturn, and somewhere in the chaos a woman gives birth on the roadside. A soldier tears his own shirt for swaddling, his face gray with helplessness. "The world's gone mad," he mutters. That night, rain turns the fields into lakes of mud. Fires sputter. People huddle under carts. You share a blanket with an old man who lost his sons at Zaragoza. He tells you quietly, "We fought for God," and God stopped answering. His voice is hoarse, almost gone. When morning comes, he's dead, peaceful, finally free of the noise. There are glimpses of kindness, though. Tiny, defiant acts that feel like rebellion. A British soldier gives his last biscuit to a starving girl. A Portuguese farmer pulls 2 wounded men, one British, one French, onto his cart, muttering, "All blood is red." A nun walks barefoot through the rain, carrying a bucket of soup, refusing to stop even when musket fire echoes nearby. The human heart, it seems, keeps fighting long after reason has deserted the field. You arrive at La Coruña just as a convoy of wounded from Badajoz comes in. The sight is staggering. Men missing limbs, faces swathed in linen, eyes glazed from fever. Some hum to themselves, others laugh without sound. One soldier, delirious, keeps whispering a woman's name. A surgeon wipes his hands on a bloodied apron and says, "We save half if God's in a good mood." You realize that victory and survival have become the same word. Amid all this, the civilians continue to carry the war like an invisible burden. A fisherman tells you he's buried his nets in the sand so the French can't take them. "They'll have to starve like the rest of us," he says with grim satisfaction. A shopkeeper sells candles at 10 times their worth but gives half to refugees for free. "We trade in hope now," she smiles weakly. A French prisoner you encounter on the march, barely 20, confesses that he envies the Spaniards' fury. "At least they have a reason," he says. "We just follow orders." You see his point. In this theater, the distinction between victim and villain blurs until it's meaningless. As the months drag on, famine takes more lives than bullets. You pass fields strewn with unburied dead, some soldiers, some peasants. The air hums with flies. Yet even here, life insists on continuing. Children play with spent cartridges, chasing each other through the ruins, their laughter eerie and bright. You can't decide whether it's heartbreaking or holy. In a chapel outside Lugo, you find candles still burning before the Virgin statue. Someone has written a prayer beneath her feet. "Keep us alive until peace remembers us." The wax drips like tears down the stone. You light another candle and whisper, "Nothing." Words feel too small. A mainstream observation shared by historians. The Peninsular War blurred every line. Between civilian and soldier, faith and fury, victory and ruin. It turned villages into fortresses, families into refugees, priests into generals, and children into witnesses too old for their years. You leave the coast behind and head inland again, following the same road refugees once took in reverse. The silence is uncanny. No songs, no voices, just the creak of trees in the wind. The war has moved elsewhere, but its shadow remains. In every doorway you pass, the ghosts of Corcubion's flight seem to watch. Mothers with empty arms, fathers staring back toward the smoke. Historians still debate how Spain survived this ordeal at all. Perhaps it didn't. Not the Spain that existed before. What rose afterward was something new, forged in grief and defiance. By nightfall, you reach a ridge overlooking the valley. Fires burn faintly on the horizon. Armies still moving, still fighting somewhere. But here, for the moment, the world is quiet. You sit among the ruins of a farmhouse, the sea's distant sigh behind you, the smell of salt and soot in your hair. And in that stillness, one thought surfaces. That war may devour nations, but it cannot quite extinguish the stubborn pulse of humanity. The people of Spain and Portugal, beaten, starved, scattered, have refused to vanish. They've turned survival into rebellion, loss into memory. The waves crash below like distant cannon. You close your eyes and imagine the wind carrying the names of all those lost: Harris, Sarasa, Palafox, Mateo, Agustina, the nameless child with the wooden cross. The tide pulls their echoes out to sea, where history will keep them safe, if not remembered. You reach Zaragoza under a leaden sky, the air heavy with the smell of ruin. What once had been a proud city of churches and music now lies like a corpse spread out upon the banks of the Ebro. Walls gape with cannon holes, roofs are gone, the river runs thick with ash. Even from afar you can tell that Zaragoza has been fought for, inch by inch, stone by stone, and finally, soul by soul. You step carefully through streets that crunch under your boots, not with gravel, but with broken glass and bone. The silence is eerie. No birds, no carts, only the wind moaning through collapsed doorways. On a wall near the Puerta del Carmen, someone has scrawled in charcoal, "Aquí murió Zaragoza, pero no se rindió." Here, Zaragoza died, but did not surrender. That's no metaphor. The siege of Zaragoza in 1808 and again in 1809 was among the most brutal episodes of the war. The French expected a quick victory. Instead, they found an entire population, men, women, monks, even children, turning the city itself into a fortress. Every church became a redoubt, every house a citadel. When walls fell, fighting continued from rooftop to rooftop. When roofs collapsed, the battle went underground. Historians still argue whether what happened here was heroism or madness, but the line between the two dissolved long ago. You wander toward the ruins of the Basilica del Pilar. The spires still stand, blackened but defiant. Inside, the floor is littered with the remnants of pews, shards of colored glass glinting in the dust. A single candle burns before the Virgin's altar. Some stubborn soul keeps it alive. You find a woman kneeling there, her face gaunt, but her back straight. She doesn't look at you as she whispers, "We have buried everyone we loved, but the Virgin still watches." Her voice cracks only once at the word everyone. Step outside again, and you'll see the city's true defenders carved into legend. There's Agustina de Aragon, young, fierce, perhaps apocryphal, who supposedly lit a cannon herself when the gunners fell, blasting the French assault to pieces. Her story spread across Europe, half truth, half miracle. You can still see the square where it happened, the stones pitted from shot. Nearby, graffiti declares, "Viva Augustina," a mainstream historical fact. During the Second Siege of Zaragoza, out of roughly 55,000 inhabitants, fewer than 15,000 survived. Cholera, starvation, and street fighting claimed the rest. Marshal Lannes, leading the French, wrote afterward, "We have taken a grave, not a city." Even hardened veterans wept at the sight of what they had done. You meet one of the survivors, a gray-haired priest named Father Sarasa. His cassock is patched, his eyes sunken, but his hands are steady as he pours you a cup of thin wine. "I marched as a prisoner once," he says, voice low, "all the way to Bayonne. Men dropped beside me like stones. The guards laughed, but not cruelly. They were too tired for cruelty." He stares into the distance. "We prayed for death, and it came for everyone but us." His name rings a bell. The same Sarasa whose written testimony later reached London. One of the few detailed accounts of French captivity from the Spanish side. In it, he described walking barefoot across frozen passes, living on scraps of bark and snow. Historians still debate whether his numbers are exaggerated, but not his suffering. You look at him now and know the truth needs no embellishment. The city around you feels alive with ghosts. Every building seems to whisper. You pause by the remains of a convent where nuns once fired muskets from the windows. Their habits had served as bandages, their rosaries as ammunition belts. There's something both tragic and awe-inspiring about it. Faith, transfigured into fury. A quirky tidbit. After the siege, French officers reportedly forbade their men from singing while marching through Zaragoza. The sound, they said, offended the dead. Whether superstition or guilt, it feels fitting. The city is too sacred or too cursed for music. As dusk falls, you climb to the ramparts. The Ebro glitters dully below, reflecting the faint light of fires still burning from scavengers' camps. The horizon glows red, not from battle, but from smoldering wreckage. Yet the people who remain, fewer than 1 in 5, move through the ruins with a strange calm. They rebuild walls from rubble, patch roofs with scavenged wood, plant seeds in soil darkened by blood. They are not waiting for peace, they are building it from scratch. You sit among them one evening, sharing a bowl of lentils around a small fire. A boy, maybe 12, plucks at a makeshift guitar strung with horsehair. The tune he plays is simple, almost cheerful. Someone hums along. For a few minutes, Zaragoza feels alive again. Historians still argue what this siege truly meant. To some, it symbolized Spain's unbreakable spirit. To others, a senseless waste that achieved nothing but martyrdom. But as you watch the survivors, faces lit by firelight, eyes hollow yet bright, you realize both can be true. Sometimes meaning isn't in victory or defeat, but in the refusal to disappear. Later, Father Sarasa walks you through the charnel ruins of the churchyard. Bones stick out from the earth like pale roots. We'll never count them all, he says. But God will. Then he smiles, a small, tired smile, and adds, if he's keeping score. That last line feels less like faith and more like defiance. A cold wind rises, carrying the smell of lime and decay. Somewhere a bell tolls, cracked but still ringing. You think of how this city has fought not once, but twice, and lost everything twice, yet still exists. The French may occupy its streets, but they'll never own its silence. On your way out, you pass the broken gates where the final defense collapsed. A single French sentry leans against the wall, dozing. His uniform hangs loose, his face too young for war. You almost pity him. He's guarding ashes from ghosts who already won. You stop once more at the riverbank. The water moves sluggishly, clogged with debris, chairs, planks, fragments of icons. The reflection of the stars trembles across the surface, fragmented but persistent, like the spirit of Spain itself. As you turn away, a thought lingers. Empires may measure victory in territory, but people measure it in memory. Zaragoza has lost its walls, but not its story. And that story will haunt Napoleon's empire long after his cannons fall silent. The candle still burns inside the basilica as you leave, flickering against the Virgin's face. You wonder who keeps relighting it. Maybe everyone, one by one. The road south from Zaragoza is a graveyard of wagons and bones. Burned towns punctuate the horizon, and crows wheel lazily over fields that once fed thousands. You travel with a company of British and Portuguese soldiers moving toward Badajoz, a name whispered with both pride and dread. The men say it's the key to Spain's heart, the fortress that must be taken if the war is ever to end. No one says aloud what it will cost. By the time you reach it in March 1812, the city looms like a nightmare out of smoke and stone. Its high ramparts rise from the Guadiana River, flanked by bastions so thick they seem carved from the bones of giants. Behind them, the French garrison waits, well-fed, well-armed, and desperate. For months, Wellington's men have clawed their way across Iberia, and this fortress stands between them and freedom. You pitch camp among the olive groves. The ground trembles with the boom of artillery. Day and night, British batteries hammer the walls, their flashes turning dusk into a strobe of fire. The air reeks of sulfur and decay. It's like hell, a sergeant mutters, only wetter. Another adds, at least in hell you get some light. The laughter that follows is half genuine, half hysteria. A mainstream historical fact. The Siege of Badajoz, from March 16th to April 6th, 1812, was one of the bloodiest in the Peninsular War. When the final assault came, more than 4,800 Allied soldiers would die or be wounded in a single night. The French lost nearly 5,000, and when the walls finally fell, discipline broke entirely. For now, you wait, digging trenches, dragging guns into position, watching men lose their humanity inch by inch. You see sappers tunneling under fire, sweat turning dust to mud on their faces. One turns to you with a grin, teeth white in the dark. "If this doesn't kill us," he says, "nothing will." He's wrong, but you don't tell him. As days stretch into weeks, morale thins. Rations run short, sleep is a rumor. The men mutter that Wellington drives them like mules, but when he rides past, they straighten instinctively. The general is calm, almost cold, his pale face unreadable. "A good siege," he tells an aide, "is won by patience and gunpowder." You can't help thinking he's half right. At dusk one evening, you climb a ridge overlooking the city. The sun sets behind the fortress, painting the sky crimson. For a moment, it's beautiful. Then another shell bursts, and the dream shatters. You see men crawling across the ditch below, dragging scaling ladders through mud. Cannonballs tear gaps in their ranks. They don't scream, they just fall. Inside the city, the French fight like trapped animals. Their commander, General Philippon, refuses surrender. "Let them come," he tells his officers. "We will bury them in our rubble." And he nearly does. The breaches widen, but each advance costs lives. You share a trench with a group of riflemen, their faces black with soot. One, barely 20, whispers a prayer between shots. "If I live through this," he says, "I'll never complain about rain again." His comrade chuckles. "You'll complain about something." They both grin. For a moment, they could be friends at a pub instead of shadows in a grave. Then the order comes. The storm begins. Night falls like a curtain, and the assault starts at 10. Drums beat low, ladders rise, and thousands surge forward, bayonets catching the moonlight. You follow them into chaos. The roar of cannon, the crash of muskets, the shriek of wounded men tumbling from ladders. The French pour fire into the breaches. You see bodies pile into a living ramp, men climbing over their fallen comrades to reach the wall. The air is thick with dust and screams. Private Harris, yes, still alive, charges past you, face streaked with soot, yelling something between a curse and a hymn. He vanishes into the smoke. Minutes blur into eternity. When the fortress finally cracks and the French line buckles, a strange silence falls, the silence of disbelief. Then comes the roar. Victory, unrestrained and savage. The British have taken Badajoz, but in winning it, they lose themselves. Historians still argue whether Wellington could have stopped what followed. The looting, the killings, the madness. Once the gates fall, discipline collapses like the walls before them. Soldiers drunk on triumph and rum flood the streets. Houses are torched, women dragged from hiding, churches plundered. The same men who prayed minutes ago now howl like beasts. For 2 nights, Badajoz burns. You walk through the city at dawn, smoke stinging your eyes. The sky glows orange and the river runs red with runoff from the slaughter. You step over bodies, French, British, civilian, indistinguishable. A drummer boy sobs beside a dead friend clutching his broken sticks. An officer sits on a doorstep, head in hands, muttering, "God forgive us." A quirky tidbit, morbid in its irony. Some soldiers found the French stores of wine and burst the barrels open, drinking directly from the streams that ran through the streets. Locals called it the blood of Badajoz. Later, even the victors couldn't recall if they'd tasted wine or tears. When Wellington finally rides into the city, he's greeted not by cheers, but by smoke and silence. His face turns gray. "Let that be enough," he whispers. It's said he wept privately that night, the only time his men ever saw him cry. You find Harris again near the cathedral, sitting amid ruins, his rifle across his knees. "We won," he says flatly. Then, after a long pause, "Didn't feel like it." His voice trembles. You nod. There's nothing else to say. Historians still debate whether Badajoz was a necessary horror or an unforgivable one. Some call it the inevitable breaking point of men pushed too far for too long. Others insist it revealed the darkness that lurks beneath all armies. You're not sure there's a difference. As evening falls, rain begins, a gentle drizzle that hisses over the smoking rubble. The fires die slowly, as if reluctant to leave. You watch the survivors move through the ruins like ghosts. British, Portuguese, Spanish civilians, even a few French prisoners helping to bury the dead. They work side by side. No words, no blame, just quiet exhaustion. When the last body is covered, the soldiers kneel, unbidden, in the muddy square. Some pray, some stare at nothing. One begins to hum a hymn, his voice cracked but steady. The melody spreads, faint but insistent, a fragile thread of grace weaving through the ruin. And in that moment, you realize what the Peninsular War has become. Not a struggle between nations or ideals, but between the parts of humanity that build and the parts that destroy. Tonight, the builders are outnumbered, but not gone. The rain falls harder. Somewhere, a bell rings from a tower that somehow survived. The sound is soft, unbroken. You close your eyes and imagine it washing over every ruined town from Madrid to the sea. A fragile promise that even after this, life will start again. The road away from Badajoz feels endless, mud sucking at boots, the smell of burnt lime and wet wool everywhere. You march beside a line of prisoners under Spanish guard, the lucky French who survived. They are barefoot, bandaged with scraps of uniform, eyes empty. Among them is a man you met once in a trench near Toledo. Lieutenant Sarasa called him Le Petit Breton, a cheerful courier who once swore the war would end by Christmas. Now he limps in silence, his optimism left somewhere under the rubble. The Spanish guards don't jeer or strike. They don't have to. Hunger and fatigue do the work. The column moves through ruined villages where the only living things are stray dogs and the crows that follow armies like camp followers. A child throws a stone at the prisoners. It misses, and he bursts into tears anyway. His mother hushes him. They were men once. When night comes, you stop by a half-collapsed farmhouse. The captives huddle together for warmth. A priest offers them stale bread. One soldier refuses, muttering, "I will not eat Spanish soil." Another snatches it, devours it, then vomits. No one laughs. Sarasa, no longer a captive, but now a reluctant witness, kneels beside you. "I once walked that same road," he says softly, "barefoot, half mad. We prayed to die quickly." He points toward the line of prisoners. They are praying the same prayer. A mainstream historical fact. Tens of thousands of French prisoners were marched north toward Bayonne after the sieges of 1812 to 1813. Few reached it. Disease, starvation, and vengeance took most along the way. Spanish escorts themselves often lacked rations. Entire columns vanished into the hills. You share a flask of sour wine with a Portuguese escort who shrugs, "The war eats everyone." He's right. The men guarding and the men guarded look equally hollow, two halves of the same misery. Historians still debate whether the cruelty of these marches was deliberate or simply the byproduct of collapse. Here, on the ground, intent doesn't matter. Only suffering does. At dawn, rain begins again. Mud turns to glue, and boots are abandoned. You walk with the prisoners until you reach a river swollen with floodwater. There's no bridge. The guards drive them through anyway. Some slip. A few don't rise. The current carries them downstream like driftwood. No one counts. That night, you shelter in a barn with Sarasa and a handful of British scouts sent to record the prisoners' condition. They're hard men, but one removes his hat as he writes, "We'll send this report to London," he says. "Maybe someone will care." His tone makes clear he doubts it. Sarasa pulls his cloak tighter. "When I was their prisoner," he says, "I dreamed of revenge. But now that I see it, I only feel tired." He looks at you, eyes hollow. "Tell me, Does this end for anyone? You don't answer. The wind does, moaning through the cracks in the roof. A quirky, almost absurd detail. One captured French drummer still carries his drum, the skin torn. He taps it gently as he walks, keeping time for the column. The guards let him, maybe out of pity, maybe because the rhythm helps them march. By the third day, his drum is silent. He left it behind like a gravestone. As the column snakes through Castile, the landscape turns cruel, rolling hills of ochre dust, villages abandoned since the first invasion. The French prisoners begin to disappear one by one into the fields. Some slip away. Most simply collapse. When a man falls, no one stops. The march has become its own executioner. You ride ahead to scout a route and find an inn somehow still standing. Inside, the innkeeper pours you watered wine and says, "You should see what the wolves eat these days." His smile doesn't reach his eyes. You step outside and indeed hear distant howls. Spain has grown wild again. Historians still argue about Sarrasa's later writings, whether his account of this death march was exaggerated to rouse British sympathy or faithfully told. But reading it beside him now, half in candlelight, you believe every word. "I walked," he writes, "among men who no longer cast shadows." That line will survive long after both of you are gone. Weeks later, near Burgos, the survivors reach a makeshift prison camp, little more than wooden palisades and open pits. The air reeks of sweat and dysentery. Guards burn dead livestock for warmth. The smoke drifts over the camp like a shroud. A surgeon moves among the prisoners with a tin of vinegar and a rag. "We have no medicine," he mutters. "Only mercy." There's not much of that left either. One evening, you sit beside Sarrasa outside the camp fence, watching the sunset stain the sky. "Perhaps God is finished with us," he says. "Perhaps he's gone to some quieter world." Then, after a pause, "If he hasn't, I hope he's sleeping." You almost laugh. Almost. A small miracle occurs the next morning. A group of villagers arrives, carrying baskets of bread and herbs. They aren't rebels or soldiers, just farmers who've decided the war has taken enough. They pass food through the fence, whisper blessings in Spanish and French alike. For a moment, the guards look away. Even hatred needs rest. A French officer, emaciated and feverish, takes a crust of bread and presses it to his lips like communion. "Merci," he whispers. Sarrasa crosses himself. "That," he says quietly, "is what victory should look like." Still, the war moves on. Orders arrive to march the prisoners farther north. Sarrasa decides to stay, tending to the sick until they die or recover. "I have seen too many buried by strangers," he says. "Let them at least have a name." You clasp his hand before parting. His grip is strong, warmer than you expect. The road out of the camp stretches across open plain, the wind slicing through your coat. Behind you, the faint sound of coughing blends with church bells from a distant town, proof that somewhere, ordinary life continues. You feel both comforted and condemned by that thought. Later that night, by another fire, you meet a French deserter who escaped the march. His eyes glitter with fever. "Do not pity us," he insists. "We came here for glory. We found only mirrors," he spits into the dust. "And what do mirrors show? Yourself." Then he laughs, a thin, broken sound, and disappears into the dark. You ride on, alone for miles. The stars above are cold pinpricks, indifferent witnesses. You think of the young drummer's silent drum, of the boy who carried the cross from Corcubion, of Harris cleaning his rifle in the ruins of Badajoz. You wonder if any of them truly knew what they were fighting for, or if the fight itself had simply become the reason. A gust of wind carries the faint smell of spring, the first you've noticed in years. Somewhere, crops will grow again. Somewhere, a candle still burns in Zaragoza. And somewhere behind you, Father Sarrasa is saying another prayer for another nameless soldier. For all its horror, the march has revealed something quietly magnificent. Even when stripped of purpose, men keep walking, not out of obedience or hope, but because stopping feels like surrender to nothingness itself. Perhaps that's the final form of courage, continuing when there's nowhere left to go. By the summer of 1812, the world seems to tilt. The great wheel of war has turned, and for the first time, it groans in favor of the Allies. You march now not behind retreating armies, but alongside advancing ones. Wellington's columns sweeping north through a land too scarred to cheer. Spain herself feels exhausted, like an old lion coughing up dust. But still, she moves. The French retreat from the south, limping toward the Duero. Their banners droop, their drums sound thin. Behind them come the Anglo-Portuguese regiments, sun-baked and sinewed, hardened by years of attrition. The green-coated 95th march near the vanguard, their rifles slung easily now, no longer the hunted, but the hunters. They hum an old barrack tune about Lisbon wine and bad officers. The words don't matter, the rhythm does. You see Wellington often these days, high on a gray horse, silent as granite. His men have begun to trust his quiet. They call him Old Nosy behind his back, never to his face. And they follow him through anything. He doesn't waste speeches. When one aide suggests a proclamation to celebrate recent victories, he replies, "The enemy knows we're doing well." That's enough. A mainstream historical fact. On 22nd July 1812, Wellington met Marshal Marmont near Salamanca and crushed the French army in one of his most brilliant maneuvers. It was a battle of movement, deception, and timing, the kind Napoleon himself might have admired. The victory forced the French to abandon Madrid and momentarily freed central Spain. You stand on the ridge of the Arapiles, watching the sun climb over a sea of smoke. The morning begins quietly, skirmish fire crackling like kindling. Then, a sudden shift. The French line overextends, chasing phantom retreating troops. Wellington sees it instantly. He spurs his horse and shouts 3 words that will echo in history. "Now, my lads." The hills erupt. British and Portuguese divisions wheel like doors swinging open, slamming into Marmont's exposed flank. Drums roll, bayonets flash. From your vantage, the battle looks less like strategy and more like nature. Waves of men colliding, breaking, reforming. In the midst of it all, the 95th Rifles pick off officers with cold precision, each shot like punctuation in a sentence written by chaos. Harris is there again, calm as always. He reloads behind a boulder, muttering, "Never seen frogs run so fast." A bullet clips his hat. He barely blinks. "Almost spoiled my hair," he grins, and fires again. Historians still debate whether Salamanca was Wellington's masterpiece or merely fortune's favor. Some say the French lost rather than the British won. But as the smoke clears, it hardly matters. The field is theirs. Marmont is wounded, his army shattered. The emperor's invincible aura, already cracked in Russia, begins to crumble in Spain too. The aftermath is quieter, crueler. The dead lie in heaps among trampled wheat. The cries of the wounded rise like wind through reeds. British surgeons move between them, sleeves rolled to the elbow, faces gray. You help carry stretchers, your hands sticky with powder and blood. A French soldier grabs your wrist and whispers, "Tell Paris we fought well." You promise you will, though you never will. That night, fires burn across the plain. Officers share captured wine with their men, the taste bitter as victory. Harris hums a tune, his voice low. "One day," he says, "someone will make this sound glorious." You both laugh. It's the only defense left. A quirky tidbit. After Salamanca, British soldiers discovered crates of French musicians' instruments abandoned in wagons. Some learned to play them, forming ragtag bands that marched out of the city a week later, drumming and trumpeting in terrible harmony. Locals said it was the loudest victory ever heard. When Wellington enters Madrid, the people weep. They fling open the shutters, ring bells, wave flags that haven't seen daylight in 4 years. Women kiss the soldiers' hands. Children follow the horses through the streets. The air tastes of dust and hope. In the Plaza Mayor, the British raise cheers for Fernando el Deseado, the long-lost king. They don't yet know he will prove less a savior than a ghost of the past. For now, liberation feels pure. You walk through the capital at twilight. The palaces are gutted, the churches half-burned, but candles glow in every window. A blind guitarist plays softly near the palace gates. His song drifts through the square, something between a prayer and a lullaby. For the first time in years, Spain sings without fear. Historians still argue what this moment meant. Some call it the rebirth of Spain. Others, a pause before relapse. Wellington himself stays sober. The war, he says curtly, is not over until the French are gone. He's right. Within months, Napoleon sends new troops south. The pendulum swings again. As autumn settles, you ride north with the army. The days shorter, the victories smaller. Yet a change hums beneath it all. Momentum, belief, fatigue. Even the French know the tide is turning. Letters intercepted from their officers speak of despair. We have lost Spain to the dust. One evening, near Valladolid, you camp beside a ruined monastery. A Portuguese veteran stirs a pot of soup and says, "When I was young, I thought war made heroes. Now I think it makes stories, and the heroes are only the ones who live to tell them." You nod, remembering Sarasa, remembering Badajoz. He ladles you a bowl and adds, "Eat. Tomorrow we march again." The stars are bright that night, too bright. You wonder if Napoleon, somewhere far away in the snowfields of Russia, can see them too. Maybe he looks up and thinks of Spain, the ulcer he could never cure, the ghost that bled his empire dry. The next morning, the bugles sound before dawn. Men stir, pack their gear, and fall into step. The road ahead gleams faintly with frost. The war moves north again, dragging you with it. A long, slow pulse of boots and dreams. As you glance back toward the south, the first light catches the towers of Madrid. Smoke rises from 100 chimneys. Somewhere, a church bell rings. For a brief moment, the sound feels like peace trying to find its voice. Then the drums start, and the world turns to marching once more. You pull your cloak tight, thinking of how far this journey has come. From the plazas of Madrid to the hills of Zaragoza, from nameless farmers with knives to Wellington's Grand Army. The names have changed, but the heart of it hasn't. Spain still bleeds, but now her blood runs toward freedom instead of despair. And as the army disappears into the mist, you realize that history itself is marching with you, mud-stained, weary, and unstoppable. The French lines are retreating now, not collapsing, but unraveling like fabric stretched too thin. Each month brings another dispatch, another empty boast from Napoleon's ministers insisting the emperor's cause in Spain is firmly secure. No one believes it anymore. From the Pyrenees to the plains of Salamanca, the imperial eagle is molting, feather by feather. You ride with a British patrol through Lyon as the snows of 1813 begin to fall. The soldiers' breath smokes in the freezing air. Their coats are patched with old uniforms, French blue stitched over British red, Portuguese green over brown. It's a walking museum of exhaustion. Ahead, abandoned artillery pieces poke from the drifts like bones. Somewhere, wolves howl. You'd almost think the land itself is reclaiming what's left of empire. Colonel Noel's letter, found in a captured courier's satchel, sums up the French position better than any speech could. We are no longer soldiers of conquest, but shepherds of ghosts. Our men die for lack of bread, not glory. Spain bleeds us from the feet upward. You read the words aloud by firelight. No one comments. Everyone knows it's true. A mainstream historical fact. By 1813, nearly 500,000 French troops had served in the Peninsular Campaign. Half of them lost to combat, disease, or capture. It was the single largest drain on Napoleon's resources outside Russia. His so-called Spanish ulcer, as he privately called it, had become a gangrene, devouring the empire. The logistical failures worsen with every mile. Supply depots stripped bare, wagons splintered by frost, regiments dissolving into foragers. You pass one French column trudging toward Burgos, gaunt men leading starving mules, their muskets wrapped in rags. A drummer beats time with numb hands, his sticks padded with cloth so they don't freeze to the skin. They salute you weakly, not out of respect, but because surrender feels like too much effort. Even their officers no longer feign control. A captain tells you, "We could march to Paris itself and not find the Emperor's shadow." Then he adds, almost kindly, "You English have your Wellington. We have only our graves." At night, in an abandoned chapel, British and French soldiers sometimes share the same fire. No one bothers to fight anymore. Both sides are waiting for orders that never come. A French sergeant passes around a flask of brandy and mutters, "To peace," if she still exists. The toast is answered in 3 languages. A quirky tidbit: starving soldiers on both sides have started boiling leather cartridge boxes into stew. They joke that it tastes of discipline. One man adds pepper made from crushed musket flint. Everyone laughs, then chews in silence. Meanwhile, the war machine sputters elsewhere. Napoleon's defeat in Russia has broken the myth of invincibility. Letters from France tell of draft riots and bread shortages. The men around you listen, half hopeful, half afraid. "If the emperor falls," one private whispers, "does the world stop moving?" Another answers, "Maybe it finally rests." Historians still argue whether the Spanish campaign or the Russian catastrophe doomed Napoleon. But reading Noel's letters, it's clear he believed both were the same wound, 2 fronts of the same hubris. He wanted Europe, he wrote, and lost himself between Moscow and Madrid. Spring brings mud again. The armies claw northward through Navarra's steep valleys, through sleet and fog. Guerrillas lead the Allies along goat trails, showing them where the French convoys crawl. From the ridges, you can see them, tiny black lines snaking through white wilderness, easy prey for riflemen. Every shot from the hills echoes like prophecy. Wellington moves methodically, cautious as ever. He's learned patience the hard way. You ride near his staff as they review captured maps. "We'll drive them to the Pyrenees," he says quietly, "and let France taste what she gave." There's no malice in his tone, just exhaustion. Even victory has become heavy. In a burned farmhouse, you meet a French field surgeon tending both sides. His supplies are gone. He uses brandy as antiseptic and old shirts for bandages. "This war," he sighs, "is a duel between skeletons." He wipes his hands, looks toward the mountains, and adds, "The Emperor has forgotten us." He doesn't say which emperor he means. You move with the Allies toward Vitoria in June. The valley there is lush, green, deceptively peaceful. When battle erupts, it's chaos, smoke, thunder, and the smell of cordite mingling with wildflowers. The French line breaks. King Joseph, Napoleon's brother, flees in his carriage, abandoning treasure, dispatches, and his dinner still warm. The Allies loot everything but the food. A mainstream historical fact. The Battle of Vitoria on 21st June 1813 shattered French control in Spain. The victory opened the road to the Pyrenees, forcing the remnants of Joseph's regime back into France. Wellington's men captured enormous quantities of plunder, so much that discipline again wavered as soldiers stuffed their pockets with coins, paintings, even a royal chamber pot. You stand in the aftermath, surrounded by the spoils of empire. Carriages overturned, jewels scattered in the mud, manuscripts fluttering like wounded birds. Harris picks up a golden cup and shakes his head. "All this," he says, "for a crown no one wanted." Then he tosses it into the river. Historians still debate whether Wellington's victory was the turning point or merely the last crack in a wall already collapsing. But the mood among the men tells its own story. They no longer talk of winning the war, only of going home. The cause that began as liberation has become exhaustion with extra steps. You spend that night near the battlefield, lying on grass flattened by cannon wheels. The stars are painfully clear. Someone nearby plays a tin whistle, the melody haunting and sweet. You think of Zaragoza's candle, of Sarasa's prayer, of the boy's wooden cross at Corcubion. Somehow, all of it led here, to this quiet between storms. As dawn rises, you see the Pyrenees gleaming ahead, their snowcaps blinding white. Beyond them lies France itself, the birthplace of the invader, the promised end of the campaign. The men whisper that if they cross those peaks, the world will finally breathe again. But you know better. Wars don't end at borders. They echo long after, in memories, in nightmares, in the hollow silence that follows a trumpet's last note. The column moves on, boots crunching frost. Somewhere behind you, Colonel Noel's words still burn. Spain has devoured us. Yet looking ahead at the soldiers trudging into the mist, British, Portuguese, Spanish, you realize Spain has also transformed them. The land that broke empires has forged something harder: endurance. And so you march toward France, toward the ghost of Napoleon, carrying with you every scream, every prayer, every fragment of humanity the war tried and failed to erase. The Pyrenees rise before you like a wall of bone, snow peaks sharp as bayonets, valleys choked with mist. For years, Spain has been a prison of blood and smoke. Now the road climbs towards something colder, clearer. France waits on the other side, trembling and proud. The men march in silence, boots crunching frost. No one jokes anymore. Even victory feels fragile, as though the mountains themselves might change their minds. You cross into the Basque country, where the air smells of pine and rain. Villages perch like birds on the slopes, stone houses with shuttered windows, uncertain which flag to hang. The people here have seen too many armies. When your column passes, they nod politely, nothing more. In this land, neutrality is survival. By July 1813, Wellington's army numbers nearly 80,000. British, Portuguese, and Spanish troops united under the same banner. The French still hold strong positions across the passes, commanded by Marshal Soult, one of Napoleon's fiercest veterans. He's been ordered to reverse the tide, to drive the Allies back into Spain, to reclaim the Emperor's honor. It will be his final test. A mainstream historical fact. Between July and October 1813, the battles of the Pyrenees raged across the rugged frontier, culminating in the defeat of Soult's counterattack. It was the last major French offensive in Iberia and marked the beginning of Napoleon's downfall in Western Europe. You follow the troops through narrow defiles, the rain turning every slope into a landslide. Cannon wheels sink, mules scream, men slip and vanish into fog. "This country hates us all," grumbles a corporal. Another replies, "At least it's honest." When the fighting begins, it's less battle than endurance. Muskets misfire in the rain. Cannonballs ricochet off rock faces, and fog blinds entire divisions. The 95th Rifles pick their way along goat trails, firing into smoke, never sure if the targets are friend or foe. Harris moves beside you, calm as always. "War's a blind man's game now," he mutters. "We just hope the dice like us." At Sororin, the two armies meet head-on. The French columns advance uphill through mud, drums beating furiously. Wellington's men hold the ridges, silhouettes against lightning. The sky itself seems to war alongside them. Thunder crashes, rain lashes faces, and muskets flash white in the gloom. You can barely hear commands. Everything dissolves into instinct. Reload, aim, fire, duck, repeat. The smell of powder burns your throat raw. Historians still debate the exact sequence of that battle. Visibility was so poor that even the generals disagreed later about what happened. But you remember fragments. A drummer boy struck down beside his drum. A Portuguese standard bearer climbing a rock to rally men who could no longer see him. A French officer saluting before surrendering his sword. acts of madness and grace, indistinguishable in the storm. When the fighting ends, the valleys are filled with mist and silence. The survivors crawl from the mud like sleepers from a dream. Soult withdraws north, leaving behind his dead and his hope. Wellington, soaked to the bone, writes one brief dispatch. The enemy has been completely repulsed. No triumph, no flourish, just exhaustion given words. You spend that night in a ruined barn, the roof half gone, the floor littered with straw and spent cartridges. Harris tends to a wounded comrade, humming a slow tune. "We're almost there," he says quietly. You ask where there is. He shrugs. "Home, maybe, or something like it." A quirky tidbit. During lulls in the fighting, soldiers traded tobacco and bread across the lines. One French grenadier even swapped his shako for a British forage cap, calling it a fair exchange for luck. The next day, he was captured. The British officer returned the hat to his family years later, still carrying the bullet hole. As September bleeds into October, the Allies push forward again. The French fall back toward the frontier forts, San Sebastian, Pamplona, Bayonne, clinging to them like barnacles. Each siege is another miniature apocalypse. At San Sebastian, British artillery pummels the city until it ceases to resemble a place where humans ever lived. When the storming comes, fire devours the streets. Even the victors choke on the smoke. You pass through afterward and see charred timbers collapsing into embers, cats darting through ruins, survivors staring as if the world has ended twice. Historians still argue whether Wellington could have prevented the sack of San Sebastian, or whether chaos had become too deeply wired into the war. Some claim the soldiers' fury came from years of hunger and discipline, others from the memory of Badajoz. Either way, the city paid in blood for its liberation. From the ramparts, you look north across the Bidasoa River. There, barely visible through morning haze, lies France. It looks ordinary. Green fields, distant villages, cows grazing unconcerned. It's strange to think that all this ruin began because one man wanted that border erased. By autumn, the Allies finally cross. The first British troops wade into the Bidasoa on October 7th, water to their waists, muskets held high. The French fire half-heartedly, then retreat. You watch them go, their once proud eagles now dull with mud. Harris salutes the river. "There it is," he says, "the end of the world, and we walked here." Wellington's headquarters moves into French soil, and for the first time, the Spanish War feels finished. But victory is a quiet thing. No parades, no flags, just rain, tired men, and the sound of boots crossing a frontier that took 6 years and 500,000 lives to reach. In a village just beyond the border, you find a bakery somehow still open. The baker, an old French woman, wordlessly sells bread to British soldiers. When you thank her, she nods and says, "It was always the same bread. Only the uniforms changed." You realize she's right. The war has been one long exchange of flags over the same graves. That night, as fires dot the hills, Wellington receives news from afar. Napoleon's empire collapsing in Germany, the Allies marching toward the Rhine. He says nothing, only stares into the fire. "So it ends," someone whispers. He shakes his head. Nothing ends. It only sleeps. The next morning, sunlight breaks through the fog, golden and cruelly beautiful. You watch the army form ranks, bayonets flashing like frost. For the first time, they're marching away from war instead of toward it. The hills echo with the soft rhythm of boots fading north, not into glory, but into history. And as you linger by the river, you think of Spain behind you, its ruins, its candles, its ghosts, and understand that while empires crumble, the people they trample somehow remain. The Iberian wind carries the faint scent of smoke and salt, and with it, a whisper, "Nunca más," never again. The guns have fallen silent. The wind that once carried smoke now carries rain, and the smell of wet grass. It's 1814, and after 6 long years, the war in Iberia is over. The French have retreated across their border, leaving behind cities of rubble and villages without names. You ride once more through Spain, not as a soldier now, but as a witness, retracing the trail of ghosts. Everywhere you go, the land is scarred. Roads gouged by cannon wheels, olive trees stripped for firewood, churches without bells. The war has ended, but peace feels thin, unsteady, like a bridge built from memories. At a crossroads near Vitoria, you see a milestone toppled by artillery fire. Someone has scratched a single word into the stone. Sobrevivimos. We survived. A mainstream historical fact. In April 1814, Wellington entered Toulouse after one last battle fought even after Napoleon's abdication. Spain and Portugal were finally free of French occupation. The conflict had lasted nearly 7 years, claimed over 500,000 French lives, and untold thousands more Spaniards, Portuguese, and Britons. For many, it never truly ended. You find Harris again in a tavern near San Sebastian, sitting by the fire, polishing the same rifle he's carried since Lisbon. His jacket is ragged, his face lined, but his eyes are still sharp. "So that's it," he says, watching the flames. "All that marching, all that killing, and now we just go home." He gives a crooked smile. If we can remember where home is. Outside, the townsfolk rebuild. Women patch roofs with scavenged slate. Men drag cannonballs from wells, turning them into cornerstones for new houses. A child plays in the mud, using an old musket as a hobby horse. You realize the war's remains have become part of daily life. Its weapons and ruins recycled into ordinary survival. Historians still argue what the Peninsular War achieved. Strategically, it broke Napoleon's power, bleeding his empire until it collapsed under its own weight. Politically, it restored monarchies that would soon disappoint their own people. Morally, well, that's harder. The war proved that ordinary civilians, driven by faith and fury, could defy the mightiest army in the world. But it also proved that liberation can leave scars deeper than occupation. You travel through Galicia again, past the villages you once saw burning. The fields are green now, but the scars remain underfoot. Charred beams half buried in soil, rusted bayonets turned to plowshares. In Corcubion, the sea still crashes against the same black rocks, but the fishermen you meet are younger, quieter. Their fathers never came back. The French are gone, one man tells you, but the hunger stayed. A quirky tidbit. In the years that followed, British veterans would return to Spain as tourists, drawn by nostalgia or ghosts. Some even brought pieces of the old battlefields home. Buttons, musket balls, shards of cannon. A few Spaniards, it's said, made trinkets from melted French bullets and sold them as charms to ward off tyrants. History turned to souvenirs, pain to profit. You stop one evening in Zaragoza. The basilica has been repaired, its domes shining again above the river. Inside, the candle before the Virgin still burns, the same flame, or at least its descendant. A woman kneels before it, whispering prayers. When you ask her what she prays for, she answers, that we never forget. From there, you ride to Madrid. The city hums with uneasy energy. Flags waving, processions for King Ferdinand, who has returned to his throne after years of exile. Crowds shout, "Viva el Rey!" but their cheers sound uncertain, as though even joy needs permission. You can't help but wonder if this is freedom or merely the beginning of another kind of captivity. Historians still debate that question too. You find a quiet inn off the Calle Mayor and take a seat by the window. The sun sets behind the royal palace, turning its stones to amber. A waiter pours you wine and says, "We have peace now." His tone is careful, as if testing the word. Peace. It tastes strange, unfamiliar. That night, you write a final entry in your worn notebook, the same one that survived the trenches of Badajoz and the mountains of the Pyrenees. You write, "The war began with an uprising and ended with exhaustion. We learned that courage can be common, cruelty too. We learned that empires fade faster than scars, and that even victory is only another kind of loss." You close the book and sit in silence. Outside, the bells of Madrid ring the hour, soft and distant. Somewhere beyond the city, beyond the mountains, Napoleon sails toward exile on Elba, staring at a sea that will soon cage him again. His empire, like the smoke of burned villages, drifts away. A final mainstream observation. The Peninsular War was the only campaign Napoleon never truly understood. He conquered kingdoms, but could not conquer will. His armies had faced soldiers before. In Spain, they faced a people. And that, historians agree, was his undoing. You return at last to the coast. The Atlantic glitters under a pale morning sky. Fishermen mend their nets, children chase gulls, the world goes on. You stand at the water's edge and breathe in the salt air, heavy but clean. Somewhere far away, the world prepares for more wars. But for now, at least, this corner of history exhales. The wind shifts, carrying faint sounds from the hills. Church bells, laughter, the hum of rebuilding. The war's echoes linger, but they no longer sting. You watch the waves fold over the sand again and again, erasing footprints as if to say, it's time. So now, take a slow breath. The fire has dimmed. The rain has softened. You've walked through 6 years of mud and grief and courage, and somehow, you're still here. The soldiers have laid down their rifles. The people of Spain sleep again, beneath quiet skies. Even the ghosts seem content to rest. Listen, the night has its own rhythm now. No drums, no marching, only the hush of wind across the water. You can almost smell the olive groves after rain, the faint sweetness of bread baking in new villages. For the first time in a long while, there is no shouting, no orders, just breathing. Imagine Harris leaning his rifle against a wall and closing his eyes. Picture the candle in Zaragoza still burning, small but steady. Somewhere, Father Sarasa whispers his last prayer, and it's not for victory or vengeance, just gratitude that the sun will rise again. The Peninsular War fades into memory, but its echoes stay with you. That stubborn resilience of ordinary people, the way courage survives long after the noise stops. History moves on, but it always leaves a trail of light in the dark for those who remember to look. So, as you drift towards sleep, let the guns recede completely. Let the weight of centuries slip from your shoulders. The battlefields are quiet now. Spain breathes, and so do you. Close your eyes. The war is over. Sweet dreams.